Have you ever paused to consider the hidden lives of the words we use every single day?
Mm,
The English language is like this incredible archaeological dig, right? With layers and layers of meaning, history, and sometimes truly unexpected origins buried just beneath the surface.
it really is.
We toss around a word like obvious without a second thought. But what if I told you that obvious once simply meant frequently encountered?
Yes, that's a good one.
And its journey to plain and evident to the mind is this fascinating linguistic shift that kind of reflects how our perceptions change over time.
Indeed. Every single word carries a story, doesn't it?
Right.
Your journey through time, culture, human experience.
Exactly.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into words, starting with the letter O.
Mhm.
We're using some incredibly rich sources like the Oxford Dictionary of Word Histories and others you provided.
Right.
Our mission really is to excavate some truly fascinating etymological nuggets. We want to uncover surprising shifts in meaning and maybe discover a bit about how our language is constantly evolving. We'll be looking at how seemingly simple words have these really complex pasts, and how a single Latin prefix, well, it can be a chameleon of meaning, shaping our understanding in pretty profound ways.
Get ready for some genuine insights then. You might just change how you think about the very vocabulary you use every single day. This is a deep dive into being truly well informed about language, maybe with a few surprises along the way.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's kick things off with some words that feel utterly familiar, yet their beginnings are anything but. First up, oaf.
Oh, oof.
When you think of an oaf today, you probably picture like a large, clumsy, perhaps a bit dim-witted person.
Well, it's the image, yeah, this sort of bumbling giant, maybe.
But that wasn't always the case. Its transformation is actually a fascinating lens into how societies label difference.
It really is. What's truly compelling here is how a word that was associated with mythical beings, often mischievous ones like elves, transforms completely. It becomes the term of derision for, well, human clumsiness or foolishness.
Elves? How did elves get involved?
Well, the word oaf first appeared in the early 17th century, and it was a variant of an obsolete word oaf.
Oath.
And
Whoa.
oaf itself came from the Old Norse word elf,
Which meant,
elf.
wow. So originally, an oaf was an elf's child. Or wait, more specifically, you said a changeling?
Precisely, a changeling. That's a child believed to have been secretly substituted by elves for a human child,
Yeah.
often seen as, sickly or troublesome or just a
Different.
changeling.
That puts a totally different spin on it. So we're talking about something otherworldly, maybe unsettling, but
Uh,
definitely not just clumsy.
Exactly, not just clumsy.
Does this transformation reflect a broader shift in how we perceive the unknown or the other? Like how we frame things that are different?
I think it does, precisely. From that initial sense of a mythical changeling, the meaning quickly evolved. It moved from referring to an elf's child to an idiot child. Yeah. And then to a halfwit. This really does suggest a cultural shift where anything other or different, something that might have once had this fantastical, maybe unsettling origin, quickly became a label for perceived human shortcomings.
So the magic drains out and it becomes an insult.
Pretty much. By the early 20th century, the meaning generalized to its current sense. Large, clumsy man. This transformation really reveals a tendency to take what's other or different and eventually, sort of, domesticate it, often turning it into a label for perceived human flaws. It shows how our language acts as a mirror, reflecting evolving societal fears, maybe, or dismissals of the unknown.
And there's even a classic literary example, isn't there? Rudyard Kipling.
That's right, Kipling. In his poem Islanders, he uses it perfectly. He says, "Then you contented your souls with the flanneled fools at the wicket or the muddied oafs at the goals."
Right, the muddied oafs at the goals. He's clearly talking about clumsy, maybe less than graceful sports players there. Definitely not actual elf children.
Not at all.
It's remarkable how a word can shed its mystical skin so completely and land squarely in the realm of human foibles. Just, wow.
Language in motion.
Okay, from mythical beings to mundane grains, let's talk about oat.
Okay. Oat.
You might think you know this one, right? It's Brexist. But there's a unique aspect to its origin that sets it apart from other cereals. It actually offers a surprising glimpse into ancient dietary habits.
Yes, this one's subtle but interesting. The Old English word was eight, and its plural was atan.
A ton. Got it.
What's particularly insightful here, and quite distinctive, is that unlike words for other cereals like, say, wheat or barley, Oat is not a mass noun.
What do you mean not a mass noun? Like,
Well, consider rice or flour. You don't usually say a rice or a
Yeah,
flour.
right.
You talk about them collectively.
yeah, some rice.
Exactly. But with oat, it seems it may have originally denoted the individual grain, like bean or pea.
That's fascinating. So the implication is what? That oats might have been eaten as individual grains. Picked and eaten directly, maybe?
That's the suggestion, yes. Rather than processed into a meal or flour, which is how we typically consume them today, in oatmeal or baked goods.
That's a significant difference in culinary history, hidden right there in the grammar of the word itself, just whether it's countable or not.
It absolutely suggests a more elemental form of consumption, potentially. And then there's an even more surprising leap in its figurative use.
Oh, more figurative leaps.
Yes. The plural oats developed a slang sense, meaning sexual gratification.
Get out, like in
It's in phrases like, have one's oats, or the more common, sow one's wild oats.
sow one's wild oats, of course. I never connected that back to the actual grain. When did that happen?
That specific use dates from the 1920s, so it's relatively recent compared to the grain itself.
Wow.
This linguistic detour really speaks to how cultural references, maybe even observations of animal behavior like horses feeling energetic after eating oats, can profoundly influence the development of entirely new, colorful idioms.
That's quite a journey for a humble grain. From individual kernel to youthful exuberance, let's say. It's a testament to how language takes these unexpected detours. Really amazing.
It shows the creativity inherent in language change.
Speaking of surprising links, how about or? It feels like such a simple, ancient word, something you'd find in almost any historical setting involving water travel.
Absolutely fundamental, yes.
But it gave us a common idiom that's still very much alive today. It demonstrates how everyday tools can just leave this enduring mark on our expressions.
That's right. The word or is an Old English word. It's Germanic in origin, closely related to the Danish and Norwegian word or. It's been around in some form for a very, very long time.
Makes sense. Boats aren't new.
Exactly. It reflects the fundamental role of boats and water travel in human history. And this longevity makes it a perfect example of how maritime life and everyday tools just seep into our idiomatic expressions.
So the idiom.
The phrase put one's oar in, meaning to interfere,
Ah, yes, to meddle.
that dates from the mid-16th century.
So it's literally picturing someone who isn't part of your boat crew suddenly dipping their oar into your water, disrupting your progress, or trying to steer your boat.
Precisely. It carries the literal action of an oar propelling or steering a boat into the metaphorical meaning of meddling or interfering in someone else's business.
This vivid imagery embedded in such a common phrase really shows how deeply practical experiences shape our figurative language. You can almost feel the unwanted splash.
It's a very physical metaphor.
And for a touch of tranquility, let's turn to Oasis. Its journey is one from literal geography to a fundamental human need, right? A symbol of respite and peace.
Yes, oasis is a lovely example. It came into English in the early 17th century. It came via late Latin from Greek and ultimately from an Egyptian word.
Egyptian, okay.
And it originally referred specifically to a fertile place in the Libyan desert, a literal life-sustaining spot in a vast, barren landscape.
So very concrete to start with.
Very concrete. This geographic specificity gave it its power as an image of survival and relief.
It's profoundly insightful how a specific geographical feature, this life-giving spot in a barren landscape, transforms into a universal symbol for peace and refuge.
It really is. The figurative meaning, a place of calm, dates from the early 19th century.
So a couple of centuries later.
Yes. This linguistic evolution beautifully illustrates how our shared human experience, that need for calm and respite, translates directly into language. It takes a concrete image and elevates it to an abstract concept we all understand instinctively.
It's a word that really resonates with that universal desire for escape and rejuvenation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It taps into something deep.
Now, hold on to your hats because we're about to delve deep into a little two-letter prefix. Tiny, but it has an enormous, often overlooked impact on our vocabulary. It's ob. You'll never look at ob the same way again after this, I promise.
Okay.
This section, I think, will genuinely reshape how you perceive a huge chunk of our vocabulary. You might assume ob just means against, right? Like in objecting to something or something being an obstacle.
That's the common understanding, yes, the confrontational one.
But this small prefix, from Latin ob, it's a master of disguise. It adds a surprising range of senses to words, showcasing the incredible flexibility inherent in the very building blocks of language.
And this raises an important question, doesn't it? How can one single prefix convey such diverse meanings?
Right. How does it do that?
The answer really lies in its foundational Latin roots, and crucially, how it interacts with the base verb it's attached to. The Latin ob fundamentally meant something like towards, against, or in the way of.
Okay, so multiple base meanings already.
Yes. But depending on the verb it combined with, these core meanings could manifest in incredibly varied ways. They could pull the combined word's meaning in wildly different directions. So let's unpack the multiple layers of ob.
Let's do it. Where do we start?
First, let's explore how ob can convey a sense of towards, meeting, or even exposing.
Okay, towards, not against.
Not against, not necessarily. Take the word obverse.
Like the side of a coin?
Exactly. The ob here gives it the sense of exposing or presenting itself towards you. It's the side of a coin or metal that bears the principal design, the face exposed to you.
Ah, okay. Makes sense.
Then there's occasion. This word comes from Latin roots meaning towards and to fall.
Towards and to fall, so...
So an occasion literally refers to circumstances falling towards you or converging, aligning to make an event possible or suitable. It's not about conflict, it's about convergence, things coming together.
Okay, I see. So it's not always confrontational. Sometimes it's about movement or orientation towards something or things aligning. That's much more nuanced than just against. What about obey? That sounds like submission, but you're saying the root is towards.
Exactly. Obey comes from the Latin obedire. That meant listen or pay attention to.
Listen to.
Yes. The elements are ob, meaning in the direction of, and audire, meaning hear.
Yeah.
So audire is literally to listen towards someone or something.
Huh, so it's about directed attention that leads to compliance, not just blind submission.
It highlights an initial act of focus, yes. Another example is oblige. Originally, it meant bind by oath.
Right.
It comes from Latin obligare, with ob, meaning towards, and ligare, meaning to bind. You are bound towards an agreement or a duty, a commitment.
Bound towards. Okay.
And then there's obtrude. This comes from Latin obtruder, meaning to push towards. You've got ob, towards, and truder, to
Push towards. How does that connect to the modern meaning?
Well, its meaning evolved to become noticeable, as if something is pushing its way towards your attention or imposing itself.
Ah, I see. It's quite remarkable how that subtle towards can lead to such different outcomes. Attentive listening with obey, commitment with oblige, forceful attention grabbing with obtrude.
It really shows how the same prefix can guide different verbs in unexpected ways.
Okay, so that's the towards meaning. What about the one we usually think of, the against meaning?
Right, now let's move to the sense of ob that is more commonly understood,
Right.
against, opposing, hindrance, or
Yeah.
in the way of. Here we see abba as direct confrontation or impedance. It's where a force meets resistance, whether that's physical or conceptual. Consider opponent.
Clearly opposing.
Yes, but it originally referred specifically to someone who would raise objections in academic debates. They would set their arguments against a thesis.
Ah, so not just any rival, but someone actively putting their ideas against yours. That adds a layer of intellectual sparring to the word, very specific.
It was, initially. Then you have obviate. That means to hinder or prevent, like removing a difficulty by anticipating it and acting against it happening.
Okay.
An obstacle is a perfect example. It comes from Latin obstaculum, from obstermor, meaning impede.
And the parts.
Its elements are ob for against and stare for stand. So an obstacle is literally something standing in the way, standing against your progress.
Makes perfect sense. Standing against.
Similarly, obstruct, from Latin obstrure, block up. You've got ob meaning against and strure meaning pile up. You're piling something against a passage, creating a barrier.
Literally blocking it up. Okay. And what about words that feel more about sound or emotion but still use ob in this against sense? Like
Sure.
something loud.
A great one is obstreperous,
Yeah.
which means clamorous or vociferous, noisy and difficult to control.
Vociferous, right?
It comes from Latin obstrepere,
Okay.
elements, ob meaning against, and strepere meaning make a noise. Imagine someone making a noise against silence or order, disrupting it with their clamor.
Ha. Okay, making noise against something, that's a very vivid image of opposition through sound.
It is. And of course, there's oppose, from Latin opponere, place against,
Yeah.
and oppress, from Latin oppremere, press against, smother, both conveying a sense of pushing down or pushing back.
Right.
Finally, opprobrious means expressing scorn. It comes from Latin opprobrium, or infamy, elements ob against, and probrum, disgraceful act. So speaking against someone with scorn because of a disgraceful act.
So whether it's a physical barrier, a noisy protest, or a verbal assault, ob truly carries that sense of being against something. It's the core of conflict and impedance embedded right there in the prefix.
That's the common thread there, yes.
But wait, there's more. Right, you mentioned other meanings.
Shifting gears again, yes. Ob can also convey a sense of completely or away, suggesting completion or perhaps an extreme state.
Completely. How does that work?
Think of obsolete. It means grown old or worn out. It comes from the Latin obsoletus, which is the past participle of obsolescere, meaning fall into disuse.
Well,
Here, ob suggests a process of completion leading to disuse. It has completely fallen out of use. It's reached the end of its utility.
this is a twist. Obsolete, implying something has completed its life cycle almost, like the word itself has finished its active duty. Okay, that's interesting. But the most striking one for me in this category has to be obese. You mentioned that one.
Absolutely. Obese, it came into English in the mid-17th century from Latin obesus. And obesus literally meant that it's eaten itself fat.
Whoa. Seriously.
Seriously. The elements are ob here, meaning away or completely, and esis, the past participle of edir, which means to eat.
So it implies someone who's eaten themselves completely fat.
That's the literal root, yes. This vivid origin conveys a sense of thoroughness, almost an endpoint, in the process of eating.
Wow. Eating yourself completely fat, that is a much more vivid and perhaps even more evocative image than just saying someone is fat. It really highlights that completion aspect of the prefix, a sense of finality. That's quite something.
A powerful etymology.
Okay, so we've had towards, against, completely. Is there another category? You mentioned mental states.
Finally, yes, ob visually appears in words relating to figurative or mental states. This is where the original physical sense of towards or against is abstracted into psychological or cognitive concepts.
Okay, give me an example.
Take obfuscate, meaning to render obscure, to confuse.
Right. To deliberately make something unclear.
It's from late Latin obfuscare, to darken, based on the Latin fuscus for dark. The ob implies making something completely dark or unclear, but in a mental sense, deliberately confusing it.
So it's not just making something hard to see, but hard to understand. It darkens the meaning, completely obscuring clarity.
Exactly. Then there's obliterate.
To wipe out.
Yes, it comes from Latin obliterare, strike out, erase. And it's based on litera for letter, something
Yeah.
written.
Ah, striking out letters.
Right. The figurative use, to get rid of from the mind, dates from the latter part of the 16th century. You are striking something out from your memory, effectively erasing it.
Okay.
And oblivion, which implies forgetting, is from Latin oblivion, from oblivici, to forget.
Oblivion.
This connection to forgetting also has a legal use. You might have heard of an act of oblivion.
Vaguely. What is that?
It's basically an amnesty for past actions, like those against Charles II and William III historically. Essentially striking those actions from public memory, legally forgetting them.
It's interesting how forgetfulness can be enshrined in legal terms, almost like a legal act of wiping the slate clean, and oblivious then follows from that.
It does. Oblivious originally meant forgetful or forgetting, but later, in the early 19th century, the meaning shifted to unaware.
Ah, so a shift from active memory loss to passive unawareness.
Yes, that shift in oblivious is quite telling. It indicates a change in focus from a conscious act, forgetting, to a state of being unaware. Then there's obsess.
Ooh, good one. Obsess.
Its early sense was haunt, possess, specifically referring to an evil spirit.
An evil spirit, seriously.
Yes, this comes from Latin obsider, meaning to siege. The elements are opposite, and sedere, sit.
Sit opposite. How does that relate?
The idea was of an evil spirit literally sitting opposite you, besieging your mind, constantly pressing against your thoughts.
That's profound. So that the feeling of being obsessed, like an idea won't leave you, is rooted in the physical image of an evil spirit sitting across from you and besieging your thoughts. What a powerful, enduring metaphor.
It truly is. The current sense, to fill the mind of, only developed much later, in the late 19th century.
Wow. Okay. What else in this mental state category?
Another one is occur. This comes from Latin occurrere, meaning go to meet or present itself. It has ab, against, but in the sense of towards a meeting point, and currere, to run.
Run to meet.
Yes. The use of the word to mean spring to mind as an idea dates from the early 17th century. An idea runs to meet your mind, presenting itself.
That's a nice image for an idea popping into your head.
Isn't it? Then consider obtuse.
Obtuse, meaning stupid or slow-witted.
That's the common meaning now.
Yeah.
But its first recorded meaning, from late Middle English, was blunt, like a knife.
Blunt.
Yes, coming from Latin obtusus, the past participle of obtunder, which meant beat against.
Beat against. So something beaten until it's blunt.
Exactly. The sense stupid developed in the early 16th century. It equates a blunt tool or edge with a blunt or dull mind that isn't sharp or perceptive.
So a dull knife and a dull intellect share the same etymological root, grounded in the idea of something being beaten against until it loses its edge. Fascinating. And what about obvious? That was our intro word. Let's bring it back.
That's a great one to look back to, as it beautifully encapsulates the chameleon nature of Obvious came into English in the late 16th century, and its early sense was frequently encountered.
Right, you said that. From?
It comes from Latin obvious, which literally meant in the way or meeting.
In the way.
Think about something you meet in the way on your daily path, something you encounter frequently. What you meet in the way often becomes plain and evident to the mind, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess it does, if you see it all the time.
Exactly. This modern sense, plain and evident to the mind, only appeared in the mid-17th century. It demonstrates how a simple spatial relationship, being in the way, can evolve into a complex cognitive one, being easy to see or understand.
This shows how abstract concepts like forgetting, obliterate, oblivion, ignorance, obtuse, or a troubled mind, obsess, are often rooted in physical actions or states, like something being struck out or an evil spirit sitting opposite you, and how obvious went from simply being in the way to being something glaringly clear.
Precisely.
It truly underlines how deeply rooted Latin is in English and how its components can express such a vast array of human experience. What an incredible range for one little prefix.
It really is a workhorse of the language.
But the surprises don't stop there. Let's look at some other words whose meanings have taken a completely unexpected detour.
Okay.
Sometimes a word starts in one place and ends up somewhere totally different, right? It charts this unforeseen course through the linguistic landscape. These are some of my favorite stories because they really make you pause and think about the slipperiness of language.
Me too. Semantic change is endlessly fascinating.
Let's start with obnoxious. Today, if you call someone obnoxious, you mean they are highly unpleasant and disagreeable, right? Annoying.
That's certainly the modern sense, yes. Very negative.
But when obnoxious entered the English language, late 16th century, you said, its original sense was quite different.
Very different. Its original sense was vulnerable to harm of some sort.
Vulnerable? How?
For example, you could be obnoxious to criticism. That meant you were exposed to or susceptible to criticism.
Wow. Exposed to it, not causing it.
Exactly. The word comes from Latin obnoxiophus, meaning exposed to harm. It contains ob, meaning towards, and noxa, meaning harm. So literally exposed towards harm.
This is a striking shift, from being vulnerable to harm to actively causing harm or unpleasantness. It really highlights how associations can completely flip a word's perceived emotional weight. It goes from passive susceptibility to active offense.
A complete reversal of valence.
Right.
And it likely got influenced by the word noxious.
Meaning harmful or poisonous.
Right. That association probably happened around the late 17th century, leading to its current strong negative connotation. It's a powerful reminder that words aren't static. Their value can fluctuate dramatically with cultural context.
Totally flipped. Okay, how about obsequious? Another word that sounds inherently negative in our current usage. It implies excessive flattery or servility, almost distasteful fawning.
Yes, that notion of servility is very much present in the modern word. However, when obsequious appeared in the late 15th century, it was not at all negative.
Not negative. What did it mean then?
Its early use was simply prompt to serve and please.
Prompt to serve and please, like helpful, eager.
Exactly. It comes from Latin obsequiosus, from obsequi meaning compliance, which itself came from obsequi meaning follow or comply with. So it's about being dutifully compliant and eager to please.
Imagine telling someone they're obsequious and actually meaning it as a compliment. You're so prompt to serve and please. That early use gives the word a completely different flavor.
It really does. It paints a picture of eager helpfulness, not fawning subservience.
It shows how societal values can subtly reshape a word's emotional weight, doesn't it? Turning an admirable trait, like being helpful, into something viewed with suspicion or scorn.
The line between eager to please and servile shifted, and the word followed.
And observe. That seems straightforward enough. To watch something or to make a comment, like curious, he observed.
It seems so, but observe also has an interesting journey. In its early examples in late Middle English, the main sense was comply with.
Comply with?
Plays in all must observe the rules.
Ah, okay. Observe the rules means follow them.
Precisely. This comes from Old French observer, from Latin observare, which meant to watch or pay attention to. The Latin root includes ob for towards and servi for attend to. So to observe rules was to attend to them or comply with them, a very active and dutiful sense.
So it wasn't about detached watching, but active adherence, like a commitment. When did it get its modern meaning of make a comment?
The sense of make a comment, as in curious, he observed, dates from the early 17th century.
Okay.
So this reflects a shift, doesn't it? From a duty-bound adherence to rules or customs to the act of mental discernment and then vocalizing an observation. It's a move from action to reflection.
From following to noticing and articulating. That makes sense. It demonstrates how language can mirror a broadening of human interaction and intellectual engagement.
A subtle but significant shift.
Another word that experienced a similar shift, going from positive to something often perceived as negative, is officious.
Ah, yes, officious.
When you hear officious, you think of someone meddling, right? Overly authoritative in an annoying way, like a petty bureaucrat.
That's the common feeling, yes. But officious came into English in the late 15th century from Latin officiosus, meaning obliging, which came from officium, meaning duty or office.
Obliging, so helpful.
Yes. Its original sense was performing its function, or efficacious, meaning effective, doing its duty well. By the mid-16th century, it meant ready to help or please, still positive.
So doing your job well or being helpful, how did it turn negative?
Later in that same century, the 16th century, it started to be used negatively. It developed this implication of meddling or unwanted helpfulness, the sense of someone being too ready to help or offering help where it isn't wanted or needed, pushing their office or duty too far.
That's a fascinating progression. It really shows how easily too much of a good thing, like being helpful or obliging, can turn into a negative trait in language. That shift from a word for someone doing their job effectively or being pleasantly helpful to someone who is annoying and interfering. It's a really striking example of semantic drift, influenced by social nuances.
It captures that fine line perfectly.
Okay, here's a word that faced quite the challenge. Occupy. Seems pretty neutral now, right? Meaning to inhabit a space or take up time or engage someone's mind.
Mostly neutral today, yes.
But for a while, people really tried to avoid using it. Why?
This is a fascinating cultural artifact within language. Occupy entered Middle English from Old French occuper,
Yeah.
and ultimately from Latin occupare, meaning to seize. Straightforward enough.
Okay, so what was the problem?
Well, a now obsolete vulgar sense emerged, meaning to have sexual relations with.
Ah, okay. That would do it?
Yes. This apparently led to the general avoidance of the word in polite society during the 17th and most of the 18th century. It just became too indelicate for conversation.
So because of a single, highly inappropriate connotation, an otherwise perfectly useful and neutral word was essentially put in linguistic timeout for centuries.
That's a good way to put it. Linguistic purgatory.
That's incredible. It wasn't until, the 19th century that it really returned to common, polite usage with its original meanings, like to fill the mind, which actually dates from the mid-16th century but was likely suppressed along with the rest.
It seems so, yes. It eventually shed the problematic connotation, or maybe society just became less sensitive to it, allowing the neutral meanings to resurface. It makes you wonder what other words have gone through similar periods of ostracism due to fleeting vulgar meanings.
Absolutely. A word's reputation can really suffer. Okay, speaking of fascinating evolutions, let's talk about odd.
Odd. Good one.
We use it to mean strange or unusual, obviously, but also to refer to numbers not divisible by 2. How are these two seemingly distinct meanings connected? Is there a link?
There absolutely is, and it's a true aha moment when you see it. Odd entered Middle English and was first used in contexts of number. It comes from Old Norse odda.
Old Norse again.
Yes. It was found in combinations like oddamather, that meant third man or arbitrator, literally the odd man out, the one left over.
The third man, the one who makes the pair uneven.
Exactly. And the Old Norse word oddie itself meant point of a sword, triangle, or odd number.
Yeah.
All things related to points or things that don't fit neatly into pairs or squares.
So odd as in not even and odd as in weird are directly connected by this idea of being the third or extra one, the one that doesn't fit neatly into a pair. It's the numerical outlier that became the social outlier, the one that stands apart.
Precisely that. The sense of strange or peculiar dates from the late 16th century, growing directly from that idea of being left over or not fitting the pattern.
Wow.
Shakespeare, in Measure for Measure, captured this beautifully.
Hmm.
If she be mad, her madness hath the oddest frame of sense. He's referring to something profoundly peculiar, uniquely unsettling.
The oddest frame of sense. Great line.
Isn't it? And relatedly, the word odds, as in betting, is recorded from the early 16th century.
Betting odds.
Yes. It's the plural of the obsolete noun odd, meaning odd number or odd person. And it clearly applies to the imbalance or advantage in a wager, where one side is numerically odd or unbalanced compared to the other.
That really ties it all together, the mathematical oddity becoming the general idea of strangeness or imbalance. It's so logical once you see the path, a testament to how abstract concepts can grow from concrete numerical ones. Very cool.
A very neat evolution.
Next up, offal. Most of us think of offal as the edible internal organs of an animal, right? Often used in cooking: liver, kidneys, heart.
That's the primary meaning today, yes. Sometimes called variety meats.
But its original sense was much broader, revealing a common linguistic process. What was it originally?
The word offal entered late Middle English from Middle Low German avel, which literally translates to off-fall.
Offal, like stuff that falls off.
Exactly, from af meaning off and valen meaning to fall. In its early use, offal referred to refuse from any process, not just butchering.
Any process? Like what?
Think of husks from milling grain or wood chips from carpentry, anything that falls off as waste during some kind of work.
So it was just a general term for discarded bits and pieces regardless of their origin. Wood shavings could be offal.
Technically, yes, by that original definition. The sense edible internal organs of a carcass did arise early, but it was usually used in the plural, offals, referring to the various pieces that fall off the main carcass during butchering.
Ah, okay, so it's specialized.
Exactly. It shows how a general term for waste, or what falls off, became specialized. It's a neat example of semantic narrowing, where a broad meaning becomes much more specific over time. It focused on a particular type of fall-off that humans found useful, especially in culinary contexts.
Makes sense. We don't tend to eat sawdust. Okay, ordeal.
Ordeal.
Yeah.
A heavy word.
That word carries so much weight, a terrible, difficult experience. Where does that intensity, that profound sense of suffering come from? It feels ancient.
It is ancient. The word ordeal is rooted in Old English ordel, or ordale. It's of Germanic origin and related to the German word urteilen, meaning to give judgment. It comes from a base meaning to share out or deal out a judgment.
Okay, so judgment is key.
Yes. And what's remarkable is that the word is largely not found in Middle English.
Really? It disappeared.
Almost. There's only one recorded instance in Chaucer's Troilus. This suggests a period where it wasn't in common use, perhaps because this practice it described had faded or changed.
And the historical context, the practice itself was truly brutal, right? Far beyond just a difficult test.
Indeed. Historically, an ordeal referred to a specific kind of trial, a test of guilt or innocence, like a trial by fire or by water, which was believed to elicit a divine verdict.
Trial by fire. Yeah, that sounds intense.
The accused would undergo some painful or dangerous test, and their survival or recovery, or lack thereof, was taken as a sign of divine judgment. This literal life or death test, designed to reveal truth through suffering, gave rise to the prime current sense, a painfully difficult experience.
When did the modern sense emerge?
That emerged in the mid-17th century. The word, therefore, encapsulates the profound terror and suffering of that medieval practice, lending its intensity to any challenging experience today.
From a literal test by divine judgment to any tough experience. Wow. The word ordeal really carries the weight of that original meaning, giving it its intensity even today. When we say something was an ordeal, we are subconsciously tapping into centuries of history where that word meant something truly life-altering and often terrifying.
The historical trauma lingers in the word.
Okay, let's consider a common phrase we use all the time. Out of order. Seems straightforward, something isn't working correctly, or maybe someone is behaving improperly.
Very common phrase, yes.
But it has a layered history, demonstrating how abstract concepts of arrangement apply to everything from machines to health. Where does it start?
Well, this phrase masks a rich semantic journey. It's part of the broader order family, which comes ultimately from the Latin ordo or ordin, meaning row, series, or rank.
Order as in sequence or arrangement.
Exactly. The phrase out of order first appeared in the mid-16th century, and it meant simply out of proper sequence.
Okay, so purely logical, like things not arranged correctly in a series or steps in a process that are mixed up.
Precisely. A very logical, almost mathematical sense initially. From that, it gradually extended its meaning. By the 18th century, it was commonly used to mean not in a settled condition.
Not settled. How so?
This included being indisposed or not in good health. Someone could be out of order if they were feeling unwell, their body not functioning in its proper sequence or state.
Ah, so it jumped from sequences to physical well-being.
Yes. And from there, it expanded to its most common modern usage, not working, referring to a machine or system whose components are no longer in proper sequence or functional arrangement.
That's a really neat progression. The logical sequence meaning evolved into states of disrepair or unwellness, showing how abstract notions of order apply to everything from machines to health to even social behavior, like someone being out of order at a meeting.
It's all about what's not in its proper functional place or sequence, a very versatile concept.
And finally for this section, overture. It's a word we immediately associate with beginnings, particularly in music, right? The piece before the opera starts.
That's the primary association now, definitely.
But its origins point to something very physical, and then it becomes beautifully metaphorical. What was it first?
That's right. Overture came into late Middle English from Old French, and that came ultimately from the Latin apertura.
Apertura, like aperture, an opening.
Exactly. Apertura simply meant an aperture or an opening. So the early sense of overture was indeed a literal opening or gap.
So a physical hole, or gap, that's a far cry from an opera. How did it bridge that gap, so to speak?
Well, the figurative use of the plural, overtures, meaning initial negotiations, as in they made overtures to them about the possibility of funding, was also found in late Middle English.
Ah, okay, so the diplomatic opening came early, too.
Yes, this already started pushing the word towards a more abstract beginning concept, an opening in diplomatic or business terms. And then, as a term in musical context for an orchestral piece introducing an opera or other extended composition, overture dates from the mid-17th century.
From a physical opening to an opening act in negotiations, and then to the opening music of an opera. It's all about beginnings, just in different forms. It's a wonderful example of how a word can retain its core concept opening while adapting to wildly different contexts over centuries.
It reveals humanity's enduring fascination with new starts, doesn't it?
Okay, some words carry history in their very sound. They embody specific cultural practices, geographical locations, or famous stories. Let's delve into those, starting with a monstrous one, ogre.
Ogre.
Yes.
Its evolution reveals how ancient fears can morph into cautionary tales, especially for kids. Where does this one come from? Ogre is an interesting case because it's a relatively late adoption into English. It appeared in the early 18th century.
Okay, not that old in English, then.
No. It came directly from a French word. And that French word was first used by the famous French writer Charles Perrault in his narrative tales, his fairy tales, in 1697.
Perrault. Okay, so like Puss in Boots, Sleeping Beauty, those stories.
Those kinds of stories, yes. And the base for that French word is classical Latin Orcus.
Orcus. Who was Orcus?
Orcus was essentially Hades, the god of the infernal regions in Roman mythology, representing the underworld and its terrors.
So the terrifying monster in children's stories has a direct lineage to the Roman god of the underworld.
That's the direct link, yes.
Yeah.
From this mythological figure of the underworld to the folkloric monster that terrorizes fairy tale characters, it shows how ancient myths can influence children's stories centuries later, albeit in a slightly, maybe gentler, more folkloric form.
Gentler. Ogres eat people.
Well, perhaps folkloric is better than gentler. But the dread associated with Orcus clearly transferred to the ogre, highlighting how deep-seated cultural fears are transformed and passed down through stories.
Amazing connection. Okay, now for one of the most common words in global communication.
Oh, okay.
Ubiquitous.
It feels so universal just as a simple affirmation. But its origin is surprisingly humble and distinctly American, isn't it?
Very much so. Okay, emerged in the mid-19th century, originally a U.S. usage, and its origin story is quite quirky. It's probably an abbreviation of oral correct.
Oral correct, like all correct but spelled wrong on purpose.
Exactly. A humorous, deliberate misspelling. Part of a fad for comic misspellings in Boston newspapers around that time, it reflects a playful, informal side of language creation.
So it started as a joke,
Yeah.
and then it somehow became the most widely recognized affirmation in the world. How did that jump happen? From a Boston newspaper joke to global dominance.
Well, the key was popularization. It became a slogan during President Martin Van Buren's re-election campaign of 1840.
A political slogan. Okay. Yes. His nickname was Old Kinderhook, derived from his birthplace, Kinderhook, New York.
Old Tinderhook. Okay.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The campaign used OK as a rallying cry, linking the playful misspelling with a political figure. And from there, it just took off. Telegraph operators also supposedly found it useful shorthand.
It's an astounding example of how ephemeral cultural moments, a joke, a political campaign, can unexpectedly birth an indispensable global idiom.
Absolutely. How often do you think Old Kinderhook when you say OK?
Literally never. It's truly remarkable that one of the most widely used words globally comes from a silly misspelling and a political slogan from nearly 2 centuries ago. A fantastic example of a linguistic accident becoming indispensable.
The unpredictable nature of language evolution at its finest.
Okay, let's turn to ombudsman. This isn't a word you hear every day, maybe, but it's crucial in certain contexts, particularly governance.
Yes, important in administrative justice.
Its adoption highlights how language pragmatically fills gaps by borrowing. Where did we get this one?
Ombudsman is a relatively recent adoption into English, dating only from the 1950s.
Fifties, okay.
It comes directly from a Swedish word. And that Swedish word meant legal representative.
Right, and in English, its function is.
In English, it refers to an official appointed to investigate individuals' complaints against maladministration, particularly within government or large organizations. They act as an impartial mediator.
So this demonstrates how specific governmental or legal concepts from other cultures can be adopted directly into English because there's no precise equivalent, right? We just didn't have a word for that exact role.
Exactly. It's a pragmatic borrowing. It acknowledges that another language had already perfectly encapsulated a necessary role. And rather than creating a clumsy new phrase, we simply borrowed the existing elegant solution.
It speaks to the practical, open source nature of language, always ready to absorb what it needs. Makes sense.
It does.
And speaking of terms for all, how about omnibus? We usually think of it as a type of bus, maybe, or a collection of books.
Right. Omnibus editions of novels or omnibus bills in legislature.
But its root is quite comprehensive, isn't it? Going back to that all idea.
Yes, absolutely. Omnibus came into English in the early 19th century via French, but from a Latin word. And that Latin word literally meant for all.
For all.
It was the dative plural of omnis, which means all. It was originally used to describe a horse-drawn vehicle, literally, a vehicle for all the people, a public conveyance.
So that large collection of novels you bought, the omnibus edition, is literally a vehicle for all the stories, just like a bus was a vehicle for all the people.
That's the connection precisely. It's such a clear, consistent meaning for all or containing many that has simply adapted to different forms of carrying or containing many things.
The word is a testament to the enduring power of its Latin root to convey inclusivity and comprehensiveness across diverse contexts. For all. Simple but powerful.
Very much so.
Okay, let's move to a word for an art form. Opera. Grand, complex, dramatic. What does its name tell us about the nature of this monumental artistic endeavor?
Opera was adopted into English in the mid-17th century. It came directly from the Italian word opera.
From Italian? Okay, and the Italian word.
That Italian word came from a Latin word meaning literally labor or work.
Labor. Work. So opera just means work.
That's the literal root, meaning yes. The earliest examples in English consciously used the Italian word, reflecting its foreign origin and perhaps its association with this grand work.
This is a great example of an art form being named directly after the immense work or labor involved in its creation and performance. It really emphasizes the scale of the production, doesn't it?
It does. The sheer effort that goes into staging an opera, from the composition, the singing, the orchestration, the set design, the acting. It's not just a show, it's a monumental undertaking. And its name carries that weight, a work of art in the most literal sense.
Makes you appreciate it even more. Okay, speaking of performance, orchestra.
Orchestra.
It's the group of musicians, of course, but it has a surprisingly active and even, well, chaotic original meaning, reflecting a shift from physical space to collective artistry.
Yes, the origin is fascinating. Orchestra came into English in the early 17th century via Latin from Greek orchestra.
Greek, again.
Yes, and the Greek word itself comes from orchestai, which means to dance.
To dance. The orchestra was for dancing.
In ancient Greek theater, yes. The orchestra was the large circular or semicircular space in front of the stage where the chorus danced and sang. It was a dynamic, active space central to the performance.
So it was a dance floor, essentially. That's a far cry from the stationary, seated musicians we think of today. How did that leap happen? From a space for dancing to the people in it playing instruments?
Exactly. It's a great example of metonymy, where the name of the place becomes the name for the thing associated with it. The use of the word for a group of instrumentalists performing concert music only began in the early 18th century, a significant shift.
And it gave us the verb orchestrate, too.
Yes, the verb orchestrate appeared later, late 19th century. It originally meant compose or arrange music for an orchestra. Standard enough.
But it has another meaning now, right?
Yes. By the 1950s, it gained the transferred sense of bring together or organize complex elements, even in a non-musical context. We now talk about orchestrating a plan, or even orchestrated pandemonium.
Huh? Orchestrated pandemonium. I like that. It highlights its power to describe precise, complex coordination, even of chaos.
It does.
So from a dancing space to a group of musicians and then to organizing chaos, what a journey. It shows how the name of a performance space became the name of the performers and then a general term for complex coordination and control. The energy of the original dancing space still kind of informs the word's ability to describe dynamic, intricate arrangements.
The ghost of the dance lives on in the word.
Now, a word that has certainly evolved in its connotation. Orgy.
Ah, yes, orgy.
Today, it implies wild, often sexual excess, uncontrolled revelry, but its roots are in a much more sacred context, aren't they? Revealing how religious practices can be reinterpreted over time.
That's right. The modern connotation is quite strong, but the origin is religious. Orgy entered English in the early 16th century, originally used in the plural as orgies. Orgies, plural, okay. It came from French orgies, which itself came via Latin from the Greek orgy, and orgy meant secret rites or revels.
Secret rites, religious ones.
Yes. Historically, these orgy were secret religious practices and festivals held in honor of Greek and Roman gods, particularly during festivals for Bacchus or Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy.
Okay, so associated with wine and revelry, but primarily religious.
Yes. While they often involved wine and ecstatic celebration, the primary purpose was religious worship, a communal and spiritual experience, not necessarily debauchery in the purely modern, secular sense.
This raises an important question about how our understanding of historical religious practices transforms into modern connotations of excess, doesn't it? It wasn't always about debauchery as we think of it. There was a spiritual, communal aspect that's largely lost in modern usage.
Absolutely. The notion of excessive indulgence in any activity, moving beyond the religious and often becoming purely sensual or unrestrained, only dates from the late 19th century.
So the word has undergone a significant semantic broadening and a distinct shift in its moral implications, reflecting changing societal attitudes towards revelry, control, and maybe religion itself.
It shows how a word can retain a sense of intense activity but lose its sacred context, becoming secularized and reevaluated through a new moral lens.
Fascinating how a word's reputation can change so dramatically. Okay, here's another word with a very specific historical and rather poetic origin. Ostracize.
Ostracize, yes. Very specific.
When we ostracize someone today, we mean to exclude them from a group or society, shut them out. But the literal roots are quite tangible and tell a story of ancient democracy.
Very tangible indeed. Ostracize came into English in the mid-17th century from the Greek word ostracizing.
And that Greek word
Is derived from ostrakon, which meant shell, or more commonly, potsherd, a piece of broken pottery.
pottery. How does pottery relate to exclusion?
Well, in ancient Greece, specifically in Athenian democracy, when citizens voted to banish unpopular politicians or citizens deemed a threat to the state, they would write the name of the person on these fragments of pottery, these ostraka.
They wrote names on broken pot pieces.
Yes, and then they cast these inscribed potsherds into an urn as their vote. If enough votes were cast against someone, they were banished, ostracized for 10 years.
Talk about a literal origin. The very mechanism of ancient Athenian democracy is embedded right there in this word. When you ostracize someone, you're essentially enacting a ritual of ancient Athenian banishment, writing their name on a piece of pottery and casting them out.
Just as they did in the classical world. It connects us directly to the political practices of over 2 millennia ago, showing how foundational civic concepts are preserved in language.
That is incredibly cool. Wow, potsherds. Okay, sticking with ancient Greece, how about Odyssey?
Ah, the ultimate journey word.
We use it to describe any long, eventful journey, maybe one with lots of challenges. but it's rooted in a very specific, famous story that has captivated imaginations for millennia.
Absolutely. Odyssey entered English relatively late, in the late 19th century. It came via Latin from the Greek Odysseia.
The Odyssey, Homer's epic.
Exactly. This was the name of the Greek hexameter epic poem traditionally ascribed to Homer, dating back to the 8th century BC. It describes the incredible travels of the hero Odysseus.
His 10 years of wandering after the sack of Troy, right? Filled with monsters, gods, shipwrecks, temptations.
All of that. A truly epic, challenging journey home.
So this is a perfect illustration of how a specific literary work can become so iconic that its title transcends its original context. It comes to describe a universal human experience.
Precisely. A challenging, extended, often transformative journey. From the literal adventures of Odysseus, we now have a word that encapsulates any meaningful, arduous personal journey. It emphasizes the power of storytelling to create archetypes for human experience.
The power of a great story to shape language itself. Amazing. Another word from ancient history is oracle.
Oracle, yes.
Today, we might use it for a person of great wisdom, someone whose advice is highly valued, like the Oracle of Omaha for Warren Buffett.
Right, a source of profound insight or prediction.
But originally, it was even more profound, wasn't it? Speaking to a direct link with the divine.
Yes, much more direct. Oracle came into English in late Middle English via Old French from Latin oraculum, and that's derived from orare, meaning to speak.
To speak. Okay.
In Greek and Roman history, an oracle wasn't just wise, it was literally the mouthpiece of the gods, possessing the power to prophesy. The Delphic oracle is the most famous example, where divine pronouncements were believed to be delivered through a priestess, the Pythia.
So a direct line to the divine, a sacred voice. From that sacred prophetic source, the meaning then expanded to just very wise humans.
Yes. Over time, it came to mean a person of great wisdom, someone whose pronouncements are so insightful they feel almost divinely inspired, even if they're human. Shakespeare captures this later sense perfectly in Merchant of Venice. Gratiano says, "I am Sir Oracle, and when I ope my lips, let no dog bark."
Let no dog bark, huh? He's claiming an authority and wisdom that commands absolute silence and respect.
Exactly. It shows the enduring human quest for profound truth, whether from gods or exceptionally wise people.
From a divine voice to a human one with profound wisdom, it's all about the power of speech and knowledge, isn't it? Whether sacred or secular. How we continue to seek out voices that articulate truths beyond our immediate grasp.
A fascinating trajectory for the word.
Finally, in this section, a colorful word that tells a truly global story, orange.
Orange. Fruit and color.
Both. But its name journeyed across continents and cultures, reflecting intricate historical trade routes and even competition between fruits.
It's a wonderful example of linguistic globalization, yes.
Aw.
Orange arrived in late Middle English. It came from Old French orange.
You have French, but where did they get it?
The French word was based on the Arabic word naranj.
Arabic naranj. Sounds similar.
And the Arabic likely came from Persian narang, which might ultimately trace back to Sanskrit naranga. The native home of the orange fruit itself was probably Southeast Asia.
So the word itself is this linguistic echo of a long trade route, traveling westwards from Asia, through Persia, Arabia, France, to England. A word carrying the scent of spice roots and ancient trade.
Absolutely. A delicious example of how words track human movement and commerce. And the story gets more complex with the fruit itself.
How so?
Well, the Seville orange, which is a bitter variety, was brought by Arabs to Sicily during the Middle Ages. From there, it spread to the rest of Europe. That was the orange they knew first.
The bitter one.
Later, in the 16th century, the sweet orange was brought from China by the Portuguese.
The kind we usually eat now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This sweeter variety rapidly ousted the bitter orange in popularity. But crucially, it adopted the existing name. The sweet orange took the name orange, even though the word originally referred to the bitter one.
So the name stayed, but the fruit it represented changed. That's fascinating. This word really tells a global story of trade, exploration, and culinary evolution. A perfect illustration of how language adapts to changing realities and preferences, even stealing names between fruits.
Language adapts to what becomes dominant.
Finally, let's explore some words that highlight the intricate, sometimes messy, evolution of language, where sounds influenced meanings or entirely different words just converged because they sounded alike. Prepare for some phonetic fun.
The confusing corners of etymology. Always interesting.
First, the curious case of ooze. We have ooze as in a liquid slowly seeping out, right? Like slime oozing. And ooze as in mud, like the ooze at the bottom of a pond.
Right. Two distinct feelings, liquid seep and thick mud.
They sound the same, they're spelled the same, but are they related in origin, or is this a coincidence?
This is a perfect example of linguistic convergence, a fascinating phenomenon. There are actually two distinct Old English words that, through changes in pronunciation, ended up sounding and being spelled exactly the same.
Two different words became one.
Effectively, yes, for modern speakers. Ooze, part one, the one meaning a liquid or sap, or the verb to trickle, comes from Old English woes, which meant juice or sap.
Woes. Okay, that sounds different.
Yes. The verb sense to trickle dates from late Middle English. So that's the liquid, slow-moving kind of ooze.
Got it. Woes became ooze the liquid, but what about the mud? Where did that ooze come from?
Ooze, part two, meaning mud at the bottom of a river or lake, was ways in Old English. W-A-S-E.
Ways. Also different.
Also different. It's related to the Old Norse word visa, meaning a stagnant pool. So these were originally two distinct words with different origins, different meanings, and different spellings. Woes for liquid and ways for mud.
Two entirely different words, one meaning trickle and the other mud, end up sounding and being spelled the same because of phonetic convergence. That's wild. It shows how the spoken word can drive changes in the written word, completely obscuring distinct histories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In Middle English and throughout the 16th century, the mud ooze was often spelled woes. And it would have rhymed with rose or repose.
Woes, rhyming with rolls.
Okay. However, from around 1550 onwards, spelling started appearing that implied a change in pronunciation. The vowel sound shifted. And crucially, it seems to have been influenced by the sound of the other word, ooze, meaning seeping liquid. The sounds merged.
And the spellings follow.
And the spellings followed, eventually becoming identical, erasing their separate origins for the modern speaker. This highlights the organic, sometimes chaotic nature of language development. Sound overrides history sometimes.
Wow. Okay, and now for ought. Another pair of homophones, right? Words that sound the same but have different meanings and origins.
That's right. Another case study in linguistic confusion.
One ought implies duty, as in you ought to do this, moral obligation. The other ought implies nothing, as in the number 0 or not. Not plus not is not.
Or sometimes spelled O-U-G-H-T for zero, especially in older texts or specific contexts.
Right. How did these completely divergent concepts, duty and 0, end up sharing a sound?
Well, this raises that important question again about how sound patterns and misinterpretations can literally create new words or shift meanings. Let's take ought, part one, meaning duty or obligation.
A common one.
Yes, this comes from Old English ought, which was the past tense of the verb again, meaning to owe.
Ah, ow. We talked about that connection before.
Exactly. So if you ought to do something, it was originally something you owed as a moral or practical debt. It was the past tense form used modally.
That's a strong ethical grounding for ought. Makes sense. And then the not version, the 0. How did that happen, considering it means nothing?
Ought, part two, meaning not or zero, emerged much later in the mid-19th century. This is thought to have come from a wrong division of the phrase a not.
A not became
An ought. By misinterpreting where the word boundary was, the end sound migrated from not to the preceding indefinite article a.
So just like how a natter became an adder for the snook, the N jumped ship.
Precisely that process. It's a classic example of what linguists call meta-analysis or rebracketing, where a word boundary is misheard or reinterpreted over time by speakers.
That's truly fascinating. Simple common speech errors can literally rewrite linguistic history and create new words.
Exactly. It shows how the ebb and flow of spoken language, including simple mishearing or reinterpretation, can generate these quirks, demonstrating the fluid, sometimes accidental, nature of language.
Mind blown. Okay, now a simpler but equally interesting case. Of and off.
Of and off. The bane of many learners.
They sound so similar, they're obviously related, but when did they become distinct in their usage? They weren't always separate tools in the grammatical box.
No, they weren't. These two words, both of Old English and Germanic origin, were originally one and the same. Off was, in fact, just a stress variant of the preposition of.
Just a variant, like saying it louder or with more emphasis.
Essentially, yes. And for centuries, these two forms were used more or less interchangeably. They were not consistently differentiated in their distinct modern meanings until after 1600.
After 1600. That's relatively recent in linguistic terms. It's hard to imagine of and off being interchangeable today. We use them so precisely. of for possession or belonging, cup of tea, off for separation. Get off the chair.
We do now, yes.
Yeah.
But for centuries, they were intertwined. This separation is a relatively recent linguistic development, probably driven by a need for greater clarity and precision in the language. It underscores how dynamic even the most fundamental prepositions can be.
Language tidying itself up over time.
Yeah.
Interesting. And what about owe and own? We touched on owe with R. They sound similar, yet one is about possession, I own this, and the other about debt, I owe you. Are they connected at a fundamental level?
They are deeply connected, yes. And this connection reveals a profound historical intertwining of the concepts of possession and obligation.
How so?
The word owe comes from Old English eigen, and eigen meant both to own and to have as an obligation.
It meant both things at once.
Yes. It had a Germanic origin from an Indo-European root shared by the Sanskrit word e, meaning to possess or to own. So the concepts of possession and obligation were fused in the same word from the very beginning.
That's almost philosophical. So if you owe something, you originally owned it in a sense, or at least had a direct obligation related to possessing it or receiving it. The very concepts of possession and debt are intertwined at their roots, implying that ownership might have inherently carried duties in that worldview.
That seems to be the implication embedded in the language, yes. A powerful reflection of ancient societal structures where rights and responsibilities were perhaps seen as inseparable.
And an own itself, as in my own car.
The word own as an adjective or pronoun also comes from this root. It's from Old English eigen, which meant owned or possessed. And eigen was actually the past participle of again, the same root as el.
So it's all connected.
All connected. The verb to own, meaning to possess or to make one's own, also came from this Old English root, einion, though its modern form was probably reinforced by the related noun owner later on. It's a complex web, but it all stems from that same ancient root linking possession and obligation, a vivid linguistic artifact of earlier legal and social systems.
Truly fascinating. Okay, next, a word we almost exclusively hear in formal, old-fashioned settings, often associated with authority. Oye.
Oye, oye.
Exactly. Shouted in courtrooms or by town criers in historical dramas. What does it actually mean and what history does it carry?
Oye came into English in late Middle English. It came directly from the Old French why, or
Old French, and it meant...
is the imperative plural of the Old French verb voir, which means to hear.
Hear.
Yes. And voir itself came from the Latin verb audire, meaning to hear. So oye is literally a command given to multiple people. Hear ye, or listen, all of you.
So it's a direct auditory link to medieval courts and public announcements. When a judge or town crier says, "Oyez," they are quite literally commanding everyone within earshot to hear or listen, pay attention.
That's exactly it. It's a powerful and immediate call to attention, carrying centuries of legal and public history in its sound. A living echo of a time when public decrees relied entirely on the spoken word and commanding attention was paramount.
Basing that it survives, even if just ceremonially. Finally, a word from the scientific realm.
Ozone.
Ozone, O3.
It's gas crucial for our atmosphere, protecting us from harmful UV rays, right? But its name reveals a very tangible sensory characteristic, not just a chemical formula.
That's right. Science isn't always purely abstract in its naming. Ozone came into English in the mid-19th century. It came from the German word ozon.
German ozon, and they got it from.
That German word was derived from the Greek ozin, which means to smell.
To smell. So ozone is named for its smell.
Essentially, yes. It's a literal descriptor, directly linking a scientific concept to a sensory observation. That's brilliant. It makes you wonder how many scientific terms are simply ancient observations turned into modern words. Reflecting a time before sophisticated instruments when smell, sight, and touch were our primary tools for understanding the world.
Indeed. One of the characteristic properties of ozone gas is that it has a very pungent, distinct odor. It's often described as sharp, like chlorine maybe. You can sometimes smell it after a lightning storm or near certain electrical equipment that produces sparks.
That smell after a thunderstorm, that might be ozone.
It often is, yes. So the naming of this gas by the chemist Christian Friedrich Schonbein in 1840 was a direct nod to that empirical sensory experience. He named it for its most striking characteristic to him, its smell.
It's a beautiful example of how fundamental observation can become embedded in the very name of a scientific concept, connecting the abstract chemical formula with the immediate human experience of smell.
Science rooted in the senses. #outro.
What an incredible journey through the O's. I mean, from elves and changelings and oaf to ancient Greek banishment rituals with pottery shards and ostracized.
And the smell of gases in ozone, the very concepts of ownership and duty intertwined in O and own.
It's amazing. These words reveal so much about where we come from, how our perceptions evolve. We've seen how a single Latin prefix, "ub," can just contain multitudes, transforming its meaning depending on the verb it attaches to, towards, against, completely.
Indeed. We've seen how meanings shift, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. They reflect changes in culture, technology, thought. Language is truly a living, breathing entity, isn't it? Constantly evolving, much like the human experience it describes.
Absolutely.
Each word is like a little capsule of history, a tiny story waiting to be unpacked, offering insight into the very fabric of human cognition and social change over centuries.
So the next time you say, okay, maybe you'll have a fleeting thought of old Kinderhook. Or when you describe something as obvious, you might remember it just used to mean in the way, or even just odd, knowing it connects weirdness to leftover numbers. You've gone on a true deep dive today, unearthing these unexpected narratives woven into our vocabulary.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? As you navigate the world, maybe consider this. How might understanding the hidden histories of words change your perception of current events, or even the way you communicate in your own daily life?
That's a great question.
Knowing the deep root of a term can offer new insights into debates, perhaps reveal unspoken assumptions lurking in political rhetoric, or even just add a richer layer of appreciation to every conversation you have. Think about how a word's past might illuminate its present power, its resonance, or even its potential for misunderstanding. How does knowing where a word came from change how you use it now?